speaker today will be Dick Dingus, one of the pastors here. He's wearing a bit of a different hat today, so to speak, because last week he was our Saturday IN speaker at the ARE, and today's presentation is the presentation that goes with that presentation last week. I've known Dick Dingus for well over 10 years. In fact, it was he who first introduced me to Virginia Beach INs. He currently serves on the board of Virginia Beach INs. He's a full-time hospice chaplain and a volunteer pastor here at the fellowship. Prior to that, he was, for a number of years, a paid pastor at another church. But the problem with being a paid pastor is the people who pay you want you to say what they want you to say, not what you want to say. So Dick eventually became disenchanted with standard Christians who just want to show up at church on Sunday, swear allegiance to Jesus, like, I'm with him, personal development, no, perish the thought, I'm with him, and then sing Rock of Ages and go home, without ever considering the possibility of opening their mind to what Jesus actually said and did, let alone to altered states of consciousness or to a non-physical existence. I feel the same way, but our responses to the problem are different. He seeks to teach them and instruct them by NDE anecdotes and other information. I seek to defeat them in rhetorical dialectic and show that their presumptions are illogical, inconsistent with biblical statements, and not even self-consistent. But you're lucky. Today you get to hear him and not me. So please welcome our friend, our brother, our teacher, Dick Dingus.
Good morning. Today, I would like to share with you my latest understanding of the truths that we can gain from a study of near-death experience. This relates to the mission of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. That mission is to promote what can be learned from near-death experience. Now, years ago, I wrote a summary paper called Near-Death Experience and What We Can Learn from It. And it's found on the homepage of Virginia Beach Friends of IANS, simply vbiands.com, under the Near-Death Experience Research tab. And I'm only going to refer to it today. You can read it later if you want. After I wrote that article, I continued my study of near-death experience, and about a year ago, I began to put together what I felt was the most significant truths that we can learn from near-death experience. And that's what I want to share with you today. Now, let me state my conclusion first, and then I will support it with references of near-death experiences and related fields. My conclusion is this: we are beings created of God's essence and with God's characteristics. We are literally the children of God with proportionate powers and abilities. We are beings created of God's essence and with God's characteristics. We are literally the children of God with proportionate powers and abilities. Now, let me develop my ideas toward this conclusion. First, I would like to share my thoughts about the development of the concept of God as spirit. To do this, I brought my plant with me today. It's a Christmas cactus, as you can see, and this is what grew from a single segment given to me by a colleague, Catherine Huey, a hospice nurse, about 5 years ago. The segment was in a small pot, and it grew other segments, eventually outgrew the small pot. I transplanted it, and I wondered if it would ever bloom. Well, then on New Year's Day, it fully opened its first blossom. It has about 3 on it now. One has gone by, the original one, but there are others there. And I can get lost in the beauty of such a blossom. And I'll ask you after service, won't you come forward and look at this plant? That's why I put it here, so that you can see it from all sides. We have flat, green, uneven segments attached to each other in a most unusual way. It almost looks prehistoric the way it's organized. But from those segments come delicate, multi-layered, round, red blossoms. Red is the opposite of green on the color chart. And when I bask in the radiance of that blossom, I feel wonderful. There's an energy here that's beyond my understanding. Nature is that way. Another example is the feathers of a bird. Hundreds of different feathers are shaped to fit perfectly around a bird's body to provide insulation and perhaps even waterproofing. And each feather is a marvel of construction with hooks from one fiber to the next. Birds intuitively know how to reconnect those feathers and do so by preening. That's what's happening. How does all this happen? How does the ancient mind conceive of this? Life seems to contain within itself an intelligent force for design and development. I believe ancient peoples recognized this aspect of creation and called the intelligence God, one of many names. The Apostle Paul wrote of this in Romans chapter 1, verse 20. For the invisible things of him, both his eternal power and divine characteristics, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being perceived in the things that were made. We have a deeper understanding of this from one of the readings of Edgar Cayce, number 294-202. God seeks all to be one with him, since all things were made by him. That which is the creative influence in every herb, every mineral, every vegetable, every individual activity is the same force you call God, seeking expression. How clear is that? That which is the creative influence in every herb, every mineral, every vegetable, every individual activity is the same force you call God, seeking expression. Takezo, a friend of my grandson Chris, told me yesterday, quote, there is a concept from Kepler called divine proportion that shows that science and religion can intertwine. This interrelationship is related to mathematical equivalencies and includes everything from stars and celestial bodies to organisms. And it proves the existence of an intelligent creator. Anything can be reproduced inside itself to infinity in a self-developing manner. Takezo says, when we think of an intelligent creator, many people think of a religion. I think it's incorrect to think of God as a figure of religion, but rather a truth of nature. The stars would not be able to exist in coordination with everything else without divine proportion. Everything exists in divine proportion to its creator. Well, this creative influence is a mystery. It's beyond our ability to perceive. It's invisible, yet powerful, sometimes gentle. It's the unfolding of life. How can that be described? A good word, taken from what we can perceive, is spirit. Native Americans called God the Great Spirit. The ancient Hebrew and Greek words for spirit could also be translated wind and breath, depending on the context. These are word pictures used to describe the mysterious animating force beyond the physical, but which can manifest itself in the physical. God is that which is beyond. God is spirit. That's what Jesus said. God is spirit. The essence of God is beyond the physical. This is where the reports of near-death experiencers help us to understand ourselves as offspring of God. We too are spirit at our essence. We are not physical beings. We're only residing in a physical body. Near-death experiencers leave their physical bodies behind and continue to exist in ethereal bodies. They try to interact with their physical environment, which they may still remain in, but are unable to do so. For example, David Oakford died from a drug overdose. He found himself in a house. He explored the house. He looked for a way out to get outside. He tried to touch the doorknob, but his hand went through it. He could not relate to the physical realm. His body was less dense, you might say. You could read more of his near-death experience at a website. His whole book is published on it, called Soul Bared, SOULBARED.com. George Ritchie described his near-death experience in which he experienced himself as a non-physical being. He tried to engage people on the physical plane, but they couldn't hear him. They walked right through him. Near-death experiencers report that at our essence, beyond all the layers, we are non-physical points of conscious energy. We are orbs of light. Juliet Nightingale saw herself this way. We compare to the source as smaller versions. The source appears as a brilliant orb. Rhys Manley saw this. He said that during his near-death experience, he expressed his desire to see God, and his wish was granted. He came to view a huge, brilliant orb. He knew this to be the source. As he was watching, he also saw many smaller orbs, some coming out of the source and some returning to the source. He observed that every orb was connected to every other orb and to the source by what appeared to be filaments of light. I've always cherished that description because it clarifies that we are parts of God and that we are all connected. This matches the description given that we are cells in the body of God. It also seems to picture sojourns of the soul away from the source and back again. In his near-death experience, Scott Hobbs learned that we are fractals of God. A fractal is a mathematical term describing a part of a larger whole. The fractal has within it all the elements of the larger whole. By this, we can understand that we are a part of God and that we have within us a portion of all that God is. Scott also shared that he learned that we are like the contents of an eyedropper dipped into the ocean and drawing out some of the contents, some of the salt water into itself. And then we live our lives as if we are separate from the source. But at the end of our life on earth, we are squirted back into the ocean. This illustration, probably more than any other one, makes it clear that we're made of the same stuff as God. God is spirit, and so are we. Western civilization has come to understand the nature of God and our relationship to God mostly through the Bible. From the Hebrew Scriptures, we read that God formed man from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils so that the man became a living soul. But how are we to understand that? Is man just dust, temporarily made alive by the life-giving breath of God? In his wisdom, Solomon gave us the right answer. It's found in Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Yes, remember your Creator now while you are young, before the silver cord of life snaps, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. We are not the dust. We are the portion of spirit that animates the dust for a short time. How accurately this describes the soul's sojourn from the source to earth and back again. But who would have understood it, having read it at that time? It needed more explanation, such as we have received today from persons such as Dr. Michael Newton, Dr. Brian Weiss, Dr. Elena Gabor. From the Hebrew Scriptures, there is even the description that humans are gods. Ye are gods, found in Psalm 82, verse 6. But it was not assimilated into the theology of Jesus' contemporaries. In fact, they thought it was blasphemy to think of yourself as that close to God, and that's what they accused Jesus of. And Jesus referred to this verse in his own defense. Oneness is another description of God. The statement is found in Deuteronomy 6:4. It reads simply, God is one. The meaning is unclear, and likely there are many interpretations. But near-death experiencers report that they came to understand that we are part of a oneness that includes everything that exists, and that oneness is God. Spirit seems to have the inherent characteristic of being one. By that I mean one part of Spirit is connected to every other part. Andy Petro experienced being part of God. He said he went into the light. He became one with the light, and yet retained his identity as Andy. The light called him by name, Andy. Suzanne Bohm also described how she went into the source during her near-death experience. That was from the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, Jesus and the Christian Scriptures added much to our understanding of God and our relationship. John wrote, God is love. And Jesus described God as having unconditional love. You may remember his words about God causing the sun to shine and the rain to fall on both the just and the unjust. It's from Matthew chapter 5. God does not withhold his or her blessings because of human misbehavior. God sustains all that is, continually blessing and nurturing everything. James wrote about this loving activity of God. He wrote that God is the giver of every good and perfect gift, the Father of lights, shining without change or shadow. There's a similar description of God's love and unconditional love in the Hebrew Scriptures. After the flood, God set the rainbow as a sign that God would never again destroy all of humankind by a flood, regardless of their behavior. You can read about it at the beginning of Genesis chapter 8. Religions teach us that if you have good behavior, then God will bless you. That is true. But it's also true that God will not stop blessing you if you have bad behavior. This is true because God is love, and love does not withhold good. Peter Panagore learned this when he talked with God after he died on the ice cliffs at the border with Canada. Peter saw God and tried to think quickly about what excuses he could present to God for his misbehaviors in life. God said to him, I forgive you. I knew you could do those things. I made you. I love you now. I have always loved you, and I will always love you. Regardless of our behavior, God will continue to love and bless us. We will, however, experience the results of our actions either way. Near-death experiencers' most powerful report is the love that they felt when they were away from this physical realm. They felt love coming from spiritual beings, including Jesus. Yvonne Sneeden felt the love of Jesus when he gave her a hug. And I felt that love when I hugged Yvonne on the Sunday in which she was a speaker here. The spiritual realm is filled with the feeling of God's love. The experience is so powerful that no one can find words to fully express it after returning to the earth. At our essence, we are also unconditional love. We may not choose it, but if we do, then we will mature. We will move into our full identity, and come to know ourselves as the true children of God. Our choice will resonate with our source, and we will find ourselves. This is the strongest message in Conversations with God by Neale Donald Walsch. Lloyd Kramer recently read the words of Paul Solomon, the founder of Fellowship with the Inner Light, that we are, quote, child gods growing up to be what our Father is, unquote. Many near-death experiencers describe what they learned to be their own essence as love. Not only this, but that everything is made out of love. Others have said all is light. Bill Taylor describes God as the love light. It's easy to follow that God, who made all things out of himself, love light, results in everything being made of love and light at its essence. In their out-of-body state, near-death experiencers see their spiritual bodies glow from within, an indication that we are made of light. Now, beyond the scriptures, beyond the simple statements, God is light, God is love, God is spirit, theologians have extrapolated additional concepts about God. God is omniscient. God is omnipresent. God is omnipotent. God knows everything. God is everywhere. God is all-powerful. Take omniscience. That's the concept that God knows everything. Many near-death experiencers say that during their near-death experience, they knew everything. Bill Taylor, who spoke here on February 3rd, 2007, is one of these. I think he spoke at Virginia Beach Ions on that date. He said that during his near-death experience, he knew how the universe works, both the spiritual and the physical realms. He said that the spiritual realm is so simple. The physical realm is more complicated. He also said that he did not bring back with him his memory of how all those things worked, but he remembers that at one time he understood it. It was all clear to him. In his near-death experience, Mellon Thomas saw universes and understood it all. He asked to remember it and did so after his return. Acute perception is also a part of omniscience. Near-death experiencers say that they were able to perceive in minute detail the scene of their death. For example, someone who died in an operating room observed the scene from above and said he could have counted the number of hairs on the arm of one of the medical personnel. Others have described the composition of layers of building materials in the ceilings of rooms through which they passed as they ascended to positions above the buildings in which their bodies died. Also in the OBE state, they say that they grasped the answers to questions almost as quickly as they posed the questions. To summarize, regarding the near-death experience of omniscience, there is an expansion of perception, of knowledge, and understanding. What seems to happen during a near-death experience is the mind of the experiencer merges with what we might call universal mind. That would be God's mind, in which all things are known. Paul the Apostle wrote about such omniscience. The verse is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12, and it reads this way: "Now, all we can see of God is like a cloudy picture in a mirror. Later, we will see him face to face. We don't know everything now, but then we will, just as God completely understands us." That was omniscience. Next is omnipresence. This is the concept that God is everywhere all at once. Proportionately, near-death experiencers report that they moved to any setting they envisioned, to anywhere or any when. I use the word any when because it fits the description of being able to go to any place in time just by thinking. Any Wen hearkens to the teaching that time is not linear, but happening all at once. Hence the term eternal now. In her book, Home at the Tree of Life, Dr. Elena Gabor points out that the person she regressed to other lifetimes did not just remember those lifetimes, but actually lived in them again during their regression. She explained that this is possible because all of our lives are taking place simultaneously. David Oakford wrote during his near-death experience, "I couldn't see my friends anywhere. I could see in all the rooms of the house at the same time just by thinking about them. The ability seemed totally natural to me, and I did not question it at all." The point is, he was able to be present wherever he thought. Omnipresence. In his near-death experience, Lono Hawala spoke locally in August of 2004. Virginia Beach Ions saw bubbles that were episodes of his life. By intention, he could enter into a bubble and re-experience it. Near-death experiencers have described experiencing themselves in past lives and future lives. Omnipresence. Next, consider how we share a portion of omnipotence. I will give just one example. PMH Atwater experienced an out-of-body state in her near-death experience, one of three she had in 1977. She told us about it in 2006. She described how she created a house, a tree, even a whole neighborhood, just by thinking and intention. Near-death experiencers have said that they learned that we are powerful spiritual beings. And those are the words that Daniel Brinkley wrote in his book, Saved by the Light. And that power includes creative ability. Theologians tell us that God is eternal, as compared to life on earth, which is temporary. Near-death experiencers tell us that in the spiritual realm, there is no passage of time. Hence, there is no urgency. Everything can happen there as long as you want it to continue. Near-death experiencers tell us that their experience beyond was timeless. Now, I would like to speak directly to the point. Some near-death experiencers were told that they are part of the divine. One near-death experiencer asked God to describe how he was related to God, and God said, "You are like a digit on my little finger." Reese Manley described our identity as parts of God better than anyone else I have ever heard. He was scheduled to speak twice at Virginia Beach Ions, but both times he had to cancel his trip due to ill health, and then he died. But he wrote 2 books, and one I edited for him. In that book, he described his near-death experience. He said that during his experience, he wanted to see God, and his wish was granted. He came to view a huge, brilliant orb. He knew this to be the source. And as he was watching, he saw many smaller orbs, some coming out of the source and some returning to the source. He observed that every orb was connected to every other orb and to the source by what appeared to be beams of light. I've always cherished that description because it clarifies that we are parts of God and that we are all connected. Victor Taylor's near-death experience is even more specific. He was pursuing his commitment to a life of self-discovery by traveling to California to study with Bob Frizzell, who had written the book, "Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are." Without much funds, Victor found himself camping under the stars. He reflected on his first rebirthing session. He wrote, "No sensation or event in my life had ever made me feel so much physical and mental pleasure. Within 45 minutes of beginning this simple breathing technique, I became aware of my being in a field of unconditional love. I became aware of my power as a creator of my own reality. At this time of the year, the nighttime temperature would drop to about 55 degrees, making it impossible to sleep for more than a few hours each night. After doing this for 15 days, this night I was sleep deprived. After borrowing a tarp from a nearby boating business, I laid down on the beach in a secluded spot inside my tarp, which I had folded like an envelope to trap my body heat. I was lying on my back, looking up at the trees as the late evening sun reinforced my feeling of well-being. Suddenly, I opened my eyes. It was dark. There were the same trees above me. I had fallen asleep on my back. Never in my life was I able to fall asleep on my back. I would always instinctively roll to my side. Tonight I found out why. I moved to sit up. I rolled forward in space, and there below me was my body, lying on its back, motionless and pale blue in the moonlight. The shock of this sight made me aware that nothing I was experiencing was the same. I was expanding like a cloud of sensation of about 25 feet in diameter. I could feel everything and anything in my vicinity. My first thought was, I need to find out if God exists. Using my mind-directed expanding cloud of sensation, I expanded and expanded. I was big as the whole beach, now as big as the state, now as big as the earth, and further, until I had reached the edges of the universe, searching for some dark, safe center where surely God would reside. I was there. I knew I was in the presence of God. As I moved closer, my viewpoint changed suddenly. Instead of looking at God, I was now God looking out. I was alone. There in that darkness, I could see that I was God, and I was all that exists. I snapped back to the vicinity of my body. The amount of love around me was incomparable to any earthly feeling. It was as if 1,000 mothers and 1,000 fathers were all loving me at once. And the wisdom, I knew everything. There was absolutely nothing in the universe that I did not know. I was perfect and complete. I was a being of infinite size, invincible, eternal, made out of a love so powerful as to put earthly love to shame. I could see that all around me was power, infinitely strong power, power so potent that, directed by the human mind, it could vaporize any matter in milliseconds. In the space of the palm of our cupped hand is so much electrical force that were our body to synchronize it, we would easily vaporize to dust in an instant. The electrical energy of our soul is so massive that were our human body to gently brush against it, we would break apart like a fuse with too much voltage. I could see that my personality was an illusion. The man who I call Victor Taylor was a fiction not even created by my own hand, but a fiction constructed by the environment I was raised in. My personality was no more of me than the scent of flowers on my pant leg after walking through a flowery prairie would be of me. My true personality was infinite wisdom and power and omnipotent love. I had come to this human experience of vulnerability and smallness to experience an entertaining illusion. The meaning of life is enlightened entertainment. I knew there that when our loved ones die, they would have more ability to influence our lives than they could ever have done while in a body. Without this limiting body, they can change events and move the minds of the living as easily as a puppet moves a marionette. From this perspective, I could see that any suffering or pain in our life is not really pain at all. All humans will return to this state upon dying, and the suffering of poverty, torture, and imprisonment will come into perspective. even in our most depressed, suicidal states, if we were to act upon our feelings and commit suicide, we would immediately feel a kind of regret that we wasted a body in an exciting life. I could also see that we humans have never experienced the pleasure of love. The emotions that we call bliss and joy and love are actually just relief from the constant suffering. The only pleasurable emotion humans ever experience is just relief. Only in the moment of uncontrolled, tear-jerking gut laughter do we even begin to taste what love really feels like. Even then, it can hardly be called a taste. All these revelations occurred to me over a few seconds of time as I was being forced foot by foot closer to my body. Now, about 5 feet away, I became aware of my body. My body was emitting a kind of interference. This interference was blocking my perception of these higher things, like the infinite love and infinite wisdom. It was like a fog that blinded my sight. I realized that I needed to hold fast to my experience or I would lose all of it in the fog. I was now beginning to wiggle into my body, feet first, moving into my shoulders. The sensation was beyond disgusting. I was being forced by some unseen force, otherwise I would not have continued. Imagine taking a dead body, allowing it to rot in the sun inside a plastic bag for 2 weeks, slice it open the long way, strip naked, and slide inside. That's exactly what it felt like. Here is where I received my greatest revelation. My body was a corpse. My body was not and has never been alive. It was animated by the tiniest trickle of my soul. It is a zombie, a rotting flesh, stumbling through life, lost to the divine life force. Zombie. I could see under my skin. In the shadowy rivers of my blood were particles of putrid decay. Soft, dead flesh made up the rest of my body. It being so out of sync with the divine life force that it had lost its true crystalline nature. Witnessing this disgusting horror, I then saw the solution to the human condition. 70% of our body's waste is eliminated through the breath. As I wiggled into my personal corpse, I realized that the one biggest thing I could do to retune my body to the divine energy and to purify the flesh was to breathe. I now wiggled in to where my observation point is looking out from the top of my head. There was a moan of darkness followed by a snap sound, and my physical eyes opened as I gasped for air, making a terrifying, just come out of suffocation sound. My body is totally racked with adrenaline, with every cell screaming that we had just faced death. I shot up and paced the beach the rest of the night, afraid to go back to sleep. At first, I believed that I asphyxiated my body by sleeping wrapped in a plastic tarp. But I later found out that I had sleep apnea, and since I had fallen asleep on my back while sleep deprived, I suffocated. Sincerely, Victor Taylor. And of course, he gave me permission to use this today. He wants to write it into a book. In conclusion, humankind has long sought to understand the essence of God and of humankind's relationship to God. The reports of near-death experiencers, available today as never before, clarify that we are part of God, sharing not only God's essence, but a portion of God's attributes as well. With this knowledge, you can think better of yourself, of your life, of your relationships to others. You can take confidence that you have within you the power to create the life you want. This clarity and the freedom to use it are God's gifts to you. Whatever you choose will be your experience. Be blessed. Thank you.